Well, welcome everybody. We're doing something a little different today. There are actually three of us in this podcast because I have two of my very informed colleagues, Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. Hello, Jonathan.
Yeah, good day, everyone.
And Dr. Robert Carter. Hi, Rob.
Hello, everybody.
So obviously in the current COVID climate, vaccines has become a very, very hot topic. People have very, very strong emotions and opinions about it. And before we start, let me kind of just set up where we come from as a Christian ministry, if people are not familiar with us. Creation Ministries International, we call ourselves biblical creationists. We take the Bible's history, the origins account in Genesis as true history. And part of that history says in Genesis chapter 3 that humans fell. In other words, they sinned against their creator. And as a result, God put a curse on the world as a reminder that things are wrong. When death occurs, when we get pricked by thorns in the garden, etc., when our loved ones die of cancer, it should be a reminder to us that something is wrong with creation. So ultimately, we live in an imperfect, sin-cursed world. And as I said, part of that is the fact that we have to now endure diseases. When we look at the New Testament, the Creator himself, Jesus, when he came to the earth, he healed the sick. He fed the hungry. They were really, really important things to him. I'm reminded of that passage where people said they cast out demons in his name, and he said, "Where were you when I was hungry?" and so on. So modern medical advances should not be shunned just on the basis that they might come from some big, large organization or even be endorsed by the government, if they can help, if you like, fulfill what we would describe as part of our biblical mandate, bring healing and the cessation of sickness in the world. So, having said that, vaccines, Jonathan, I think actually recognize God's design because we have a wonderfully complex immune system, don't we?
Well, yes, God would have given Adam an immune system to distinguish between self and non-self, and we now know there are probably about as many bacterial cells as human cells in the human body. So even in a pre-fall world, Adam would have had to have an immune system to keep them in their place. But nowadays, it can be trained to recognize new invaders. It's a very, very trainable system. We have the adaptive immune system, and this is what vaccines do. They train the immune system to recognize new disease germs.
Yeah, see, my understanding is from the moment we leave the womb, we're actually entering a new environment and world, bacteria, etc., that the body's never experienced before. So immediately, our body is already doing that, isn't it, to adjusting to the new environment, Rob, with potential pathogens. It might not be deadly, but could be deadly if left unchecked, if our body didn't build up an immunity to them.
Well, basically, any bacterium is potentially deadly. If our immune system short circuits, we're going to be eaten alive by bacteria. So we're constantly dealing with it. Thousands of species, millions of bacteria, billions of bacteria every day. Our immune systems are interacting with those things, plus fungi, viruses, and you name it.
Yeah, so in a way, vaccines recognize this incredible design in our system. They give the body target practice for a potentially risky exposure later on. So now vaccines have an incredible history too. I mean, I think of two very debilitating diseases that literally ravaged people worldwide, smallpox and polio. And in fact, I'm the oldest geezer on this podcast, and I actually know people who'd suffer from polio, and people can look up.
I've known too.
You know too, yeah.
And
So
one of them was my age also.
Oh, goodness.
From a foreign country, not from America.
yeah, so people can just look on the internet and see how people were treated in iron lungs and so on. I mean, it was a horrible disease, but smallpox has been eradicated. They're working hard. There are a few, cases of polio where it might be occurring around
Almost
the world.
gone.
But Jonathan, a lot of people have claimed that those diseases have been eradicated because of better sanitation and better water in those countries, but that's not correct.
Well, it certainly isn't correct, because polio was more feared than the atomic bomb even into the 50s, before the polio vaccine was developed. And in the 50s, America was very sanitary, so it wasn't a sanitation issue. Clearly, it was a vaccination issue. And also, we see diseases various diseases dropping in case number at different times that correlate with the introduction of the vaccine for that specific disease. You see, if it was sanitation and nutrition, we'd expect to find the case number dropping at the same time for every disease, and we don't see that. Polio was still a scourge when it became sanitary. Also, measles outbreaks occur when vaccination is reduced, like in this terrible epidemic in Samoa. It wasn't a hygiene issue, it was clearly a lack of vaccination issue that got measles erupting again.
Yes, I think what can even happen is even some of our medicos today can say, well, we don't have measles around, no need to get vaccinated and so on. But in some respects, that's because they've actually never ever seen those diseases. So like you say, last year in Western Samoa, there was a mass outbreak, and measles is actually a very dangerous disease, particularly for our children. So some people have claimed, and I actually dealt with this in an email just the other day, that thousands have died from vaccinations, Rob. I mean, I just don't believe that's true whatsoever.
Well, thousands of people die every day. And thousands of people die after getting vaccinations if you add up the numbers over a long period of time. But if you just look at how many people die per day, there's no difference between the people that get vaccinated and the people that aren't get vaccinated. Car accidents, cancer, whatever still happen. There's no correlation between vaccination rates and death rates.
And in fact, we were sharing, I think, a study in Denmark of over half a million children that had received childhood vaccinations, and they found not a single cause related of illness in later life as a result of having those childhood vaccinations. And that brings us to another point, because people often say, well, don't you know, like in the flu shot, there's aluminum or aluminium, as we'd say down under, and mercury, and these are poisons and toxins, Jonathan.
Well, aluminium's actually the official international chemistry name of the element. Okay, but point is, it's very important to understand the first rule of toxicology is the dose makes the poison. You can't tell me a substance is toxic unless you tell me the amount of the stuff. I mean, water and oxygen can be toxic if you have too much of them. And the thing is, the amount of mercury in the flu shot, you need about 1,000 flu shots in a week to get a toxic dose, because the mercury is about the same amount as you get in a serving of tuna, but the serving of tuna has a more dangerous form that accumulates. The stuff in the vaccine doesn't even accumulate. It's excreted within about a few weeks, half-life of a week in the body. And same with aluminium. It's a very common metal in the environment. You're going to get far more aluminium from milk, from food, from from cooking utensils than you're going to get in a vaccine.
Yeah, and mercury probably from eating large pelagic fish.
Yes, exactly. Tuna, it's worse. It's worse, in fact, yes.
And yet, out of an abundance of caution, we have removed mercury from most routine vaccinations, almost all of them, and yet autism rates haven't dropped.
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? And we want to be empathetic here, because, I was watching a doctor the other day, and he said on YouTube, and he says, we now have 12 people whose children have got autism after having a vaccination. And that makes it sound like somehow there's been some scientific study that proved causality, but it's a little difficult to say to someone whose child has suffered from autism that it wasn't the vaccine that did it. It's our natural human instinct, isn't it, to look for something to blame. But the reality is, as I said at the beginning, we live in a fallen world, and that includes the degeneration of our genome and mutations increasing in the population.
Even the autism organizations that advocate for autistic people, they reject the vaccination link. They encourage people to get vaccinated because people notice autism around about the same time as their children get vaccinated and make a connection, when in fact all you have is things happening at the same time. Doesn't prove a causal link. And now we understand autism seems to develop in the womb before any vaccines were involved, but noticed around the time that vaccines were given. So there's no causal link. Has been disproven as about as much as you can disprove anything.
And and a lot of people say, and particularly in the COVID environment, we've got new vaccines out, and some people will say, well, we don't know the long-term effects of these. The thing we should realize is that every medicine, every drug that comes to market has to go through what I would call a gold standard, all right, of testing and trials and so on. All those medicines and drugs are being kind of adhered to, and it's true with anything that we take. We don't know what necessarily the long-term effects. But that's called an appeal to ignorance, because you can say that about absolutely anything that we eat. The tea, the coffee, anything that comes to market.
Every new medical advance ever.
And I want to point out too, because another criticism is that, healthy living and taking vitamins and supplements, which I take, I'm all for them, will help us fight these diseases. Well, we said at the beginning that we live in a cursed world. So they're not necessarily always going to prevent these terrible diseases that we have. But it says something interesting. The supplement market is absolutely massive, and it's sold as food, and they can make a lot of claims like, hey, take this to stop hair loss, or take this to prevent cancer, or whatever. And because it's sold, they don't have the rigorous...
They have to be careful with such claims, and people get in trouble for false advertising, but they have a lot more leeway than big pharma does as far as their claims.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. I've taken fish oil capsules for years, and I think it was in the last 2 years, there was a bit of an investigation that it was coming over in metal barrels and not even being refined, coming over from overseas, not even being refined before it was put into capsules. So it doesn't necessarily have the same safety standards that obviously any medicine or pharmaceutical has to go through.
The thing here is also they don't understand the two components of our immune system. You have the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system, and these supplements can only help the innate immune system. They cannot possibly help the adaptive immune system, because that needs to see what it's adapting to, either by catching a disease or by a vaccine against a disease.
Yeah.
So I remember, Jonathan, you and I having a conversation during the Ebola pandemic, epidemic in Africa. And we interviewed in Creation magazine one of the doctors from there, etc. And they very, very quickly developed a vaccine. I mean, Ebola is deadly. It has, I think, about an 80% mortality rate.
It's a nasty thing, yes.
This doctor was telling me, I met her at an event up in Oregon, and she said they've even been able to give it to people in the very early stages of the illness, and it actually cured them. So again, the idea of vitamins, of supplements, is to help the body, but actually isn't that exactly what vaccines are doing, Rob?
Oh, absolutely. By training our body to identify a harmful pathogen, we're prepared for it, and we can head it off when we get exposed to it. It's brilliant. In fact, they actually do a little more than that. When they started introducing measles vaccines to different countries, doctors worldwide noticed a plummeting rate of all sorts of other diseases. And then what they figured out was, measles erases immune system memory. So if you catch measles, you can catch all the diseases you already were, self-vaccinated against. And so measles is bad. So some vaccines have a spillover effect. They just enhance health in general.
So another thought too is, babies, children get infant vaccines. I mean, the doses are obviously adjusted for the baby, and some people say, well, they get too many shots at the beginning. But I think I read somewhere from the moment we're born, we get introduced to literally dozens and dozens
Try thousands.
Thousands in the atmosphere anyway. So what's your thought, Jono, on the fact that, baby has a few vaccine shots?
Well, I mean, there's no way. The amount of antigen exposed when the babies are born far exceeds the number of all the vaccines combined. In fact, even grazing your knee, the immune system is going to work harder than all the vaccines combined that you get. In fact, you could have about 1,000 shots and still basically use only 1% of your immune system. That's how good our God has designed our immune system, that even 1,000 vaccines would not overload it. It wouldn't even begin to overload it.
Now, here's the big one I'm going to talk about and throw at you guys too, because we see viral emails and even ministries coming out saying, literally, basically saying, vaccines contain baby parts, or at least that's the impression that they're trying to convey to people. And, that's a very, very scary kind of soundbite, Rob. But, we know that there's been testing on fetal cells, and we'll talk about the history of where they came from, etc. And then I'll ask Jonathan about the moral implications. But where does that stand in terms of particularly the COVID-19 vaccines that are coming out at the moment?
Well, that's a touchy subject. lots of arguing, a lot of opinions, a lot of people being squeamish, and some people not feeling, worried about it at all. The fact is, though, that several vaccines are grown on cell lines derived from abortions that occurred several decades ago. Now, I don't like this. I wish it was otherwise, but it is also pretty standard. In fact, there's a lot of industrial things that have used these cell lines for testing. I mean, a lot of our products we buy in a supermarket probably have some place where these cells were used somewhere. Most vaccines don't use fetal cells at all. Two of the leading COVID-19 vaccines don't use them at all. Several of the others do. Several other vaccines that you might get routinely were cultured on fetal cells, usually to grow up a virus or something like that that can be heat killed and then injected into the arm. So there's a great debate. There's a lot of angst. But in the end, these products are purified. So it's not like you're injecting, the leg of a baby into your arm or anything like that. Now, there'll be some molecules, from that culture. And it's not like the cultures are necessarily 40 or 50 years old, because a culture doesn't last that long. We continually have to go to older stocks and resurrect from a freezer an older stored culture and then grow that, and that's used to make a new vaccine thing. And eventually those stocks are going to run out, and then we're going to have a crisis because scientists are either going to have to make a new one or find some other way to do it. And I hope they do that doesn't use fetal cells at all.
CMI, we are a pro-life ministry. And the reason we're pro-vaccine is because we are pro-life. Now, Rob said that's not an ideal situation, but this happened, back in, for example, with the HEK293 cells, back in the 1970s. You and I, as recipients of a vaccine, we did not take part in that murder. And I'm kind of reminded of, Joseph's admonition to his brothers, in Egypt when they turned up. He said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. So we have an unfortunate situation of a baby being aborted. We don't really know the circumstances. A lot of people have strong opinions to say that they do. But the cells from that baby are used to help in some way or form, and even used at a testing stage to develop a vaccine that can potentially save hundreds of millions of people.
Well, I mean, I could also add the crucifixion of Jesus was a monstrously evil act, one of the most evil acts that could be committed, and yet our salvation depends on his death, right? So we can also talk about, the organ donor. An organ donor can be a murder victim. Now, if you take that organ, you're in no way condoning that murder. You're in no way encouraging more people to be murdered for organs. So as long as you didn't take part in that murder or had anything to do with it, it's morally right to take an organ from that murder victim or drink driving victim. I think this is the same thing with taking a vaccine derived from a baby aborted sinfully 50 or so years ago. We are not responsible for that sin, and we're also not encouraging other people to do the same sin, because that's why the babies are dated decades back. Clearly, no more babies at the moment are being used, are aborted to make vaccines. So we're not encouraging further evil by this act.
Yes, and I think, Rob, we now are at the stage with technology. They can use other methods to derive cells that can be used for testing, etc.
And it's time, and people are demanding it. And the vaccine and other pharmaceutical companies, they know the public is getting really antsy about their use of fetal cells, and new things will be coming along. They will change something because they want to make money, honestly. And if half the people refuse to take their product because it has some association with the abortion industry, they'll change.
Well, I think there's a parallel with the stem cell, because at one time embryonic stem cells was all the rage, but now adult stem cells have been proven so good that the embryonic stem cell industry is dead. It's not only immoral, it's also ineffective. And I think that's the way forward with this. Use some sort of adult stem cell as the culture medium, which is a
I'll put up my hand right now. I volunteer.
Yeah,
you can have my cells, pharmaceutical industry.
So the evil is remote, and in some cases, people have to look at the individual vaccines because the connection is also quite tenuous. But the reality is, and I've heard this a lot, well, I'll probably only, get a cold, or, people say, well, I've had the flu and I've survived it. I can tell you the flu, I've had it twice. I caught swine flu, and I've had flu in an earlier stage of my life, and I was bedridden, and I felt so sick. I literally thought I was going to die. I've never felt so ill in my life. So it's a bit of a false idea to say, well, I'm healthy, I won't get really sick. Tens of millions of people catch the flu in the United States every year, and on average, 30,000 die. We've had far less people contract, say, COVID, but we're up to 500,000 deaths in the United States alone. So surely, Jonathan, the results or the risk of not taking a vaccine is actually greater than taking it.
Oh, much more. And I think people, don't realize that death isn't the only thing that can go wrong. But the thing is, if you've got thousands of deaths every year from influenza, it's a dangerous disease. But then you've got 400,000 hospitalizations in the 2019 to 20 season. And of course, you've got lots of medical visits, which are a cost, lots of work absenteeism. So the cost of non-vaccinating far exceeds the cost of vaccinating. And also flu shots are not even associated with the aborted baby issue because they're cultured on chicken eggs. It means there's less likely for the chicken, the flu virus to mutate in the egg cell, therefore not match what's circulating wildly. So now use dog kidney cell lines. But again, those are moral because they are in the Dominion mandate. We're allowed to use chickens and dogs to benefit ourselves. That's moral.
We have lots of emails about this. We are a scientific organization. I want to point out to people who are listening, because some people are saying, oh, well, those guys, they're just towing the big pharma line, or they're just towing the government line on this. As a ministry, we employ scientists all around the world. You guys are PhDs. You've given up your careers in universities and as like others in the mainstream science industry. You could never go back. You've burnt your bridges to work for biblical creation. We've got no skin in the game, because our ministry has been opposing mainstream science, the mainstream science of evolution, for over 40 years. So when we deal with people with the science and the correct theology, that's often what we hear. Oh, well, you guys are just in big pharma, or I just don't trust the government. Well, it's wise probably not to trust the government, but doesn't necessarily mean that everything governments do is bad for us. And I know you've written an article on why CMI rejects conspiracy theory.
Yeah, both of us together.
Both of us co-authored, yes, sorry.
Yeah, we are a science advocacy organization. We don't hate science. We don't distrust science. Science is good and it's real. Where we part from the mainstream is in historical sciences. We have, operational science. We can test things. We can know things. We can run experiments right now, right today. And there are things we can absolutely know. What we don't know is history. That's why we use the Bible as a guide for history, and why we reject evolutionary science. But vaccines are part of not evolution. They're part of operational science. We can do this, we can do that, we can do that. Oh, it protects you from disease. Is there a risk? Yeah, but the risk is demonstrably smaller than the disease itself. That's why we advocate for them.
By orders of magnitude. 1,000 of times less risky than the disease. And I might say that vaccination was discovered by creationists too. So why should we avoid it? We should embrace it.
So we're kind of back to where we started, aren't we? So this is operational science, things you can demonstrably repeat and test. We know that vaccines have worked. They've reduced the incidence of deadly diseases. They've made humanity healthier. That's a good thing. Healing the sick was part of Jesus's mission on earth. And we should follow, I believe, what Jesus did.
All of us should be pro-Bible. We're not anti-establishment for the sake of it. We're pro-Bible, and the anti-establishment only when it contradicts the Bible. We shouldn't be anti-establishment as our primary focus.
And I'll say that's one of the things I've always loved about CMI, because the Bible doesn't speak about everything, but you can use the Bible to derive, if you like, biblical wisdom about how, we should act and operate in our world. So viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us today. We welcome your comments, but you heard me say at the end there, please engage us with science and facts. If I'm going to be frank, if there's comments like, well, you guys are just idiots because you just believe the government, we're probably not even going to post it because it's not meaningful discussion and you haven't engaged with the points that we've had here. Now, we're going to post some links to some very important articles at the bottom. One by Jonathan about vaccinations in general, and it deals with probably most of the arguments that some of you might have. And then Dr. Robert Carter's excellent article on the 2 mRNA vaccines. You know, is that going to alter our DNA and all these types of things that people are saying. So thanks for joining us. And again, this is such an important topic. We encourage you to share this video and encourage your friends to subscribe. Vaccines demonstrably save lives. And ultimately, we believe that is a good thing. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.